again, my dear students. Today's rule is to show you the difference in meaning between must and have to. Where can I use must and where can I use have to? But before going into any details, you should know the meaning of must and the meaning of have to. Let's see together the meaning of must and the meaning of have to. First, must. We use it to express a strong point of view. We need to do something. We have to do something. So the modal must also expresses opinion, one person's point of view. For example, you must fasten our seatbelts. You must stop playing computer games. She must learn to drive. It will be very useful. Banks must examine all documents. So here, must is an obligation, something you should do, something you should do, or something you have to do it. I must call my mom more often. So must is an obligation. It's an obligation of yourself. It's from your point of view. So I say to myself, I must do it. So here, your mom, for example, gave you a strong advice. You must study your lessons. So must is what? Must is strong point of view of yourself or a strong advice from someone very close to you. But have to, something you need to do, following a rule. For example, he has to see the doctor. You have to drive slower than 110 kilometers an hour on highways. What have you to say for yourself? You have to wear uniform in class or at school. So this is an obligation, but this is according to rules. So here you should follow a rule, so you have to do something because it is a rule. But here must is a strong point of view, or it is an obligation, or you just say it to yourself, I must do it because it's very important to do it. So here must, something I must do because I think I must do it. But have to, something you must do, but something you must do because of some rules you should follow. So this is the difference between must and have to. Both expresses obligation, but this is an obligation according to yourself, and this is an obligation according to rules. Okay, let's see what is the difference between mustn't and don't have. First, you should know that mustn't is the negative of must, and don't have to is the negative of have to. Mustn't, just like must, it is prohibited, something it is not allowed to do something. You shouldn't do it. It is important that you do not do something. But don't have to, there is no obligation. You can do it or you cannot do it. So it's according to your choice. Don't have to, it's not an obligation. But mustn't, an obligation not to do something. For example, you mustn't drink that. It means it is forbidden to drink that. Don't drink that. It is not allowed, or you are not allowed to drink that. You mustn't tell John it means that you are not allowed to tell John anything. Don't tell him anything. But here, if I say you don't have to drink that, it means you don't need to drink that, but you can if you want to. You can if you want to. So, the same example, but here with mustn't and here with don't have to. If I say you mustn't drink that, it means that it is forbidden and you are not allowed to drink that at all. And if I say you don't have to drink that, it means that you can drink it or you cannot drink it. It's up to you. It's up to your choice. Here, you mustn't tell John, it means it's forbidden to tell John. It's not shouldn't. No, you are not allowed to tell John. It is forbidden to tell John. But here, if I say you don't have to tell John, it means you can tell John or you cannot tell him. So it is not necessary not to tell him. Okay? So here it is according to your choice. So here mustn't is an obligation not to do such a thing. But don't have to, it is not an obligation. You can do it or you cannot do it according to your point of view. This is the difference between mustn't and don't have to. And remember one thing, mustn't is the negative of must and don't have to is the negative of have to. Very good. Let's see something else. Must here, just for be sure that must is the negative is mustn't, and have to, the negative is don't have to, and here has to, the negative is doesn't have to. What is the difference between have to and has to? Or in other words, where can I use have to and where can I use has to? Let's see something. Of course, you know have with I, we, they, and you. So here, when the sentence with I, we, they, and you, I will use have to. And when I use have to, I will use the negative don't have to. So here have to with I, we, they, and you. And when I use has to, it is with he, she, it. So when I use has to, I use it with he, she, and it. And when I use has to for obligation according to rules, so the negative will be doesn't have to. Of course, has with s, the negative will be doesn't have, again, doesn't have. So here have to, the negative is don't have to. Has to, the negative is doesn't have to. Must, the negative is mustn't. What is the difference between must and have to? Must is an obligation. It is a strong opinion. You must do something. Or in my point of view, I must call mom. Or for example, I must call my brother. It is his birthday, so I must call him. This is from yourself. This is from your point of view. But when I say, I have to fasten my belt on board, it is according to the rules on board. So have to, you should or you have to do something according to some rules, or because you should follow some rules. So here have to according to rules. Has to with he and she and it, and it has the same meaning of have to, but have to with I, we, they, and you, and has to with has, with he, she, and it. And when I see have to, so the negative will be don't have to. And when I see has to, the negative will be doesn't have to. And when I see here, what is the difference between mustn't and don't have to? Mustn't is what mustn't for obligation. It is forbidden to do it. You are not allowed to do it. But don't have to or doesn't have to, it means what? It means that you can do it or you cannot do it. So you have the choice either to do it or not to do it. Here, look at this very important rule. Must, mustn't, have to, has to, don't have to, doesn't have to. All these modal verbs are followed by V1. Are followed by V1. So here you should write V1 after must, after mustn't, after have to, after has to, after don't have to, after doesn't have to. All these modal verbs are followed by V1. V1. I must play or I must study. I cannot say I must studying. I mustn't play in the street. I mustn't. I have to. I have to fasten my belt on board. Has to. She has to fasten her belt on board. I don't have to tell Jones. To tell. I cannot say to telling. And she doesn't have to tell Jones. To tell, not to telling, or not to tells, or not to told. To and V1. So all these modal verbs are followed by V1. Okay. Let's see this rule again. So again, this is our rule. What is the difference between must and have to? Must, strong opinions or advice, but have to, obligation according to rules. Mustn't is the negative of must. It means that you are not allowed to do something. It is forbidden. Don't have to is the negative of have to. It means that you are not forced. You can do it or you cannot do it. It is up to your choice. Let's see this exercise together. It shows us what is the difference between have to and has to. Where can I use have to and where can I use has to? And where can I use don't have to and where can I use doesn't have to? Have to with I, we, they and you. Has to with he and she and it. So here have to and has to affirmative. But in the negative I use don't have to, which is a negative of have to, and doesn't have to, which is a negative to has to. So here all these sentences affirmative. We either choose have to or has to according to the pronouns we have. So here I, we, she, you, they, he. I have to or has to. Have to or has to. Of course I have to. Very good. So here I have to. I have to go to work. This is an obligation according to duty or rules, because you should follow some rules. So you will choose have to. Number 2, we what do our homework. We have to or has to. We have to. Very good. So here we have to. Next, she what study math. So she have to or has to? She has to. Very good. Because has to with he, she, and it. Next, you have to or has to. Have to or has to. You have to. So we will choose have to. Very good. They have to or has to get up early. They have to. So we will choose have to. He has to go to school or he have to go to school. He have to or he has to. Of course, he has to. So here have to, here have to with I, we, they, and you. Has to with he, she, and it. Let's see here. Where can I use don't have to or doesn't have to? Of course, don't have to is the negative of have to, and doesn't have to is the negative of has to. So here we what go to the park. This is negative. So here don't have to or doesn't have to. We what? We don't. Why? Because we takes have, and have to, the negative is don't have to. So here we takes have to, and this is in the affirmative, and in the negative it will be don't have to. He takes what? Takes has to. So when it is in the affirmative or in the positive has to, so in the negative will be doesn't have to. So he what? He doesn't have to. He doesn't have to go to the cinema. It means that it is according to his choice. It's up to him. He can go to the cinema or he cannot go to the cinema according to his point of view. So he doesn't have to go to the cinema. They don't have to or doesn't have to. They takes what? Don't have to. Why? Because only he, she, and it take doesn't have to. Doesn't, remember, doesn't with he, she, and it, but don't have, don't with we, they, I, and you. So here I have they takes don't have to or doesn't have to. Of course they don't have to. It will be here don't have to. Good. Let's see next, the next one. I what get up late. I don't have to or I doesn't have to. I don't or I doesn't. Of course I don't. So I will choose don't have to get up late. Very good. Next, she what fight with her brother. She what fight with her brother. She don't have or she doesn't have. Of course she doesn't have. Why? Because she takes has to, and the negative of has to is doesn't have to. So here have to, the negative is don't have to, and has to, the negative is doesn't have to. And remember one thing, has and doesn't have to with he, she, and it. The last one, you what run in the street. You don't have to or doesn't have to. Of course you don't have to. Very good. So here I will choose you don't have to. You don't have to run in the street. So remember that I use have to and has to express obligations, to follow rules. So here have to with I, we, you, and they. Has to with he and she or it. And then the negative is, then what is the negative of have to? Don't have to. What is the negative of has to? Doesn't have to. Now, task A. Complete each sentence with must or mustn't. where can I use must and where can I use mustn't? Of course, must and mustn't express obligations. Must expresses obligation. It is a strong point of view. It is what do you think that you must do, but mustn't is an obligation for not doing something. You are not allowed to do it. It is forbidden. So here, must and mustn't express obligation. This expresses obligation for doing something, and this expresses obligation for not doing something. Let's see here how can we complete each sentence with must or mustn't. Let's look here at the picture. Peter is sick and in the hospital, so doctor tells him to do something and not to do something. Number 1, he take his medicine regularly. He take his medicine regularly. So he must take his medicine regularly. So he must. And look here at the verb after must. It is V1. It is V1. So here after must, V1. Very good. Number 2, he what have a rest. He what have a rest. He must or he mustn't. Of course he must have a rest. And after must have V1. So here after must, V1. Number 3, he what go to work for a week. He must go to work for a week or he mustn't go to work for a week. Of course he mustn't because he is sick and he couldn't go to work. So here he mustn't go to work for a week. He mustn't. And after mustn't, what? Go. Can I say he mustn't goes or he mustn't going? No, he must go. V1. Why? Because must and mustn't are followed by V1. Remember. Number 4, he what do any housework. He must do any housework or he mustn't do any housework. Of course, he mustn't do any housework. Very good. So after mustn't, do. So do is V1. I cannot say he mustn't does or he mustn't doing. He must do. Good. Next. He what call the doctor if he gets worse. He must or he mustn't call the doctor if he gets worse. Of course, he must call the doctor if he gets worse. And after must, call. It's V1. Can I say he must calling? No, he must call. He must call. The last one, he what lift heavy objects for a while. He what? He must or mustn't? Of course, he mustn't. He mustn't lift heavy objects for a while. And after mustn't, lift. Lift, V1. So after must and mustn't, V1. And what else? Again, after must and mustn't and have to and has to and don't have to and doesn't have to all these modal verbs are followed by V1. What is V1? It is the verb without S, without ing, and without ed.